Greetings and welcome to the AfterWords program. AfterWords is a weekly discussion of the weekly sermons presented by Bila Kuta, which means Church Without Walls, which is one of the many programs of the Shrine of the Black Madonna of the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church. My name is Baba Kafense Chike, your host, and I'm joined by Cardinal and Bayou Chui, this week's minister and presenter of this week's sermon, Chasing the Color Purple. Please remember to like and share our broadcast across all social media platforms and continue to join us during our weekly live streams on YouTube at shrineoftheblackmadonna.org or Shrine of the Black Madonna online on YouTube. And greetings to all you that may be viewing us, and welcome to you, Cardinal and Bayou. How are you this afternoon or this evening?
I'm great. How about you?
I'm fine. Trying to adjust to the weather, but we kind of get used to that in Detroit, right?
Right.
So I really love the metaphor that you used of chasing the color purple. And of course, it was very timely considering that movie, or the rendition of the movie / musical recently seemed to be a hit in theaters around the country. And you open by saying or explaining that chasing the color purple, or you relate chasing the color of purple with our people chasing a sense of our human value. And you reference, and I did not memorize the scripture, but you reference a scripture from Peter, and to surmise what you conveyed in the sermon, that you expressed that he was trying to remind the nation of Israel that they were a great people, which suggests to some degree they may have lost that sense of their greatness and their significance to God. You also expressed that we are responsible for carrying out God's will and purpose. How does chasing the color purple and our sense of human value relate to our responsibility for carrying out God's will and purpose? And why should we be concerned with doing that?
Good question. So, number one, even before we get to carrying out God's will and purpose for our lives, just having a sense of identity about who we are. You can't have self-esteem and self-validation and affirmation if you don't know who you are. If you're looking for that kind of affirmation from some other group of people. And really what got me, other than all the billions of advertisements all through November, December, thinking about the idea of the color purple was, hearing the interviews with the actors and actresses, and particularly Taraji, and her saying, how she had to fight to get the little bit she got, and actresses and actors are never paid what they were. Well, yeah, if they're Black, that's true, but that's true across the board. In any field, we do the best work and get paid the least, and are always overlooked, and always somebody else gets a promotion because they know somebody. And then the more I thought about it, I said, this is the story of America. White wealth comes from Black labor. We ain't never got credit. And we're always chasing that sense of validation and affirmation, but in the wrong places. So it all ties together. If we don't have a sense of identity and purpose, then the struggle doesn't even matter. What are we struggling for? We don't recognize that our freedom and our sense of validation comes from inside, not externally.
Yes, I think that's a very important point. Could you maybe elaborate, based on what you said and what I interpreted from part of the sermon, is there is a parallel in terms of the message that Peter had to the nation of Israel at the time, and the message that the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church has to our people? Could you elaborate on that, please?
Well, the African nation Israel had been through tremendous changes. First, they were tormented for 200 years by the Greeks. Then the Romans came in and totally took them, turned them upside down, stealing their land, taking over the government, occupying the holy city, crucifying Jews, thousands of Jews, not just Jesus, around Jerusalem. And they were at their lowest low. And then after the death of Jesus, and the disciples tried to come back together, well, did come back together and had the upper room experience, they knew that they had to carry on the movement, the messianic movement that Jesus began. And so Peter was speaking to their need to recognize who they were as a nation, as a people. And if they didn't understand that, then this new movement wasn't going to get any traction. It was going to die. So he was trying to remind them about who they were and what their purpose was. You're a royal nation, a holy priesthood, consecrated by God. We're still the covenant people, even though we've been through all of this, been scattered everywhere, been exiled for hundreds of years. The kingdom has been more divided and alienated than ever before. You got Jews speaking all kind of languages, adopting all these foreign cultures. They were in a terrible state. Jesus had already prophesied the fall of Jerusalem. He had already prophesied it. So Peter was just speaking to the reality that they lived in, that we got to remember who we are, or else they're going to wipe us all the way out.
Okay, could you maybe elaborate a little more on how the work that Jeramogi did in the late 60s and early 70s to develop Black liberation theology and how that connects to this message, and the programs that were presented as part of the unveiling or revealing of Black liberation theology?
Well, the whole premise of Black Christian nationalism was that we got to reconnect Christianity to its African roots as an African religion. The whole story of the nation Israel is the story of an African people living in Africa. And that's where we have to begin if we're going to get Black people to understand the need for us to be a nation, to be a people, and to struggle collectively for our own freedom, equity, justice, and all of that. So he understood the importance of that story, especially since 80% of Black people who profess to be religious are Christian. It makes perfect sense. That's got to be the starting place. And so he understood that and tried to do the legwork so that we wouldn't all have to do the legwork to understand those connections, right? And he commissioned Black historians. This is a fun fact many Black people don't know, especially folks who follow Black historians, that he commissioned Dr. Yosef Ben Yochanan and many others to do the research and write those books on African religion and the African origins of Christianity. They got that tutelage from our beloved founder, Reverend Albert B. Clegg Jr. And so we wouldn't all have to do that work. So he laid that foundation, and that foundation is still just as important today as it was 60 years ago.
Isn't there a chapter in Black Christian Nationalism, New Directions for the Black Church, that is either written by Dr. Ben or contextual work that Dr. Ben did?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. That chapter in Black Christian Nationalism was just the beginning of his thesis for that research. And Jeramogi, after he ordained Dr. Ben, he said, "Now you got to go rewrite the Bible." That was his assignment. He said, "Now I'll never forget that, sitting in that service when he ordained those, not just Dr. Ben, but it was about 100 Black men and women from across the country in 1970.
So you were actually there to witness this. That's impressive.
I was standing outside the door looking in during all those training sessions, and why can't we be in there? But it was for 18 and up.
So you were under 18 at the time.
72, I was 16.
Oh, okay. All right, that's another fun fact, as you say. I didn't know that one, and I think I know a little bit. You mentioned in the sermon, unlike the traditional church, and I may not have the quote 100% accurate, we must effectively learn to chase the color purple utilizing our faculties for Black empowerment in the name of justice, equality, and liberation for African people everywhere. Could you expound on that?
So we have to, we already, obviously, there's something in our psyche that loves the color purple. So let's start right there. Why? Because we know there's some inner divinity inside. We know that there's some power. We know that there's something special about who we really are. So if we understand that on at least on a unconscious level, then let's apply it. Let's not chase the color purple to be accepted by white people who will never accept us for who we really are. Let's apply that to our self-determination struggle and our need to transform our lives collectively as African people everywhere in the world. Let's chase the color purple for the right reasons.
And you also express, well, in anticipating this conversation, I was really compelled to go to the concluding comment in the sermon, which I thought was very powerful. And I think you very strategically work your way to that concluding comment, which was identification with our brothers and sisters brought me back to God. And that encompasses so many things that you said in the sermon, but could you maybe speak to that idea and the power or the importance of the collective as it pertains to our struggle and what our needs are as a people?
I still remember when our beloved founder wrote that poem. And I thought it was so powerful then, and it's still powerful. When I read those words, I said, he has connected our inner consciousness to our external reality as Black people. We are all looking for identification, but again, in the wrong place. But it really spoke to who we are as a collective and why identifying with our brothers and sisters, our struggle, our joys, our sorrows, our pain, our hurt, our rejection, why that's so important in our relationship with God. If we can't identify with each other, how are we going to identify with the God we have not seen? Mm-hmm. That's impossible. We got to find God in each other, in our relationships to the group, which is what the whole Bible is about, our covenant relationship as a group of people. God speaks to the group. So he was connecting all those dots in that poem. I thought that was such a powerful poem 40 years ago, and it still is.
Yeah, when I look at Jeramogi's life, Reverend Clegg's life, and I just recently reread Prophet of the Black Nation, I think it's called, that he knew to shift, I think in around 72, he shifted his focus from all of the external community activist-oriented activities, and he then turned inward on the programs of the church. And then to see these various poems and the various things that he innovated is just mind-boggling, or maybe not mind-boggling, but just impressive. Another point that you made was, and I want to try 2 points I think that you made. One was the color that you illuminated how, or illustrated how the characters in the color purple learned that they had the power within themselves and not external to them to make their lives better. I'm paraphrasing. I wanted to connect that to another phrase that you used. I think it was, we cannot effectively struggle against oppression without spiritual power. For me, both of these things speak to the need for us to tap into spirit, which is preeminent, but also the idea that we have that in us. And you responded to that, but if you could maybe elaborate.
Yeah, so in preparation for the sermon, I was reading the cliff notes from the book, Alice Walker's book, The Color Purple, and she spoke to the idea that the characters' struggle, their personal journeys towards transformation, was really about them finding the color purple inside of themselves. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was that resonated on so many different levels, because collectively we will never have a sense of nationhood and peoplehood unless we all take that same inward journey. So every character in the story is us. That's why Black people love that movie, because they all represent who we are, individually and collectively. Personally, their challenges and hardships are shared across the Black experience,
Mm,
and not just in America. See, we think it's just in America. You can go
right.
to Africa and find Black people, African people, dealing with the same issues of identity and validation. You know, I had an experience one time when I was in Benin many years ago, and this broke my heart into 1,000 pieces when I heard this beautiful African Nigerian, just she had a nervous breakdown outside of a hotel. I had taken a group of about 30 people to Benin, and the whole trip fell apart. The hotel reservation, everything. So she was like one of the chief of staff for the organizer. And so she had to do a whole lot of running around and making stuff happen at the last minute. And I guess she was just spent. And so she stood there on the steps of that hotel outside, just cursing the day she was born. And why did I have to be made African? And my skin is too dark and my hair is I mean, it was gut wrenching for me to listen to her. And after she finished, I had a moment of divine discontent. And I said, "You are beautiful. God made you African and Nigerian on purpose. Are you cursing God?" I mean, I had to help her understand, no, 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 no. Why are you blaming yourself for something that you had nothing to do with? You had
Mhm.
nothing. But that was her, and so it made me understand that African people had the same niggerization that Black people in America have. It's just a westernized version of the same socio psychological emotional trauma. Uh, and it made it very real for me. I had some other similar experiences too, but I'm not gonna go into those. But
Okay, well, we don't have a lot of time, but I appreciate that. But you mentioned the word niggerization. Could you maybe say a little bit about that and how it fits into the context of us seeking the color purple?
so
Chase.
we've all, and that's a great question. We've all been conditioned to hate ourselves and to feel that being African is inferior
Mhm.
and the substandard rather than the standard. So collectively, as African people, no matter where we live in the world, we have adopted Western values and a Western standard of beauty and a Western system of understanding our place and our role and our value to human society as a whole. So our struggle is universal. And that movie can translate into 50 different languages, and African people everywhere can relate.
Okay, you mentioned, and well, two other points. One, you mentioned that we need a shift in spiritual consciousness is needed. And you also, I think, well, this is me interpreting, you state that this century, I think you quote another scholar or a theologian or something to the reference that this century is the first century where humans choose violence over peace, destruction over progress, and death over life. And as I think about the young lady you mentioned and the niggerization process, I think the result of that, we oftentimes have bought into the idea that other people's ice is colder than ours. We don't look within ourselves for the answers and the solutions that we need. So could you maybe expound on that a little more? What this shift looks like and how the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church seeks to facilitate this shift so that we can do the work that we need to do and do it effectively.
So that quote that I paraphrased from the book God in the Midst of Change by theologian Diarmuid Merchu, and he was really saying that all these things we see happening in the world today are symptoms of a bigger, much deeper problem, and that's the spiritual void of human society. And because of the information age, because of technology and the machine culture that we live in, we are at human society is at the lowest point of human evolution because of our lack of spiritual consciousness. And so before we can do anything to rectify our situation, we have to first realign ourselves with who we are, and to chase the color purple on the spiritual plane rather than on the material plane.
Yes.
And really that was the essence of my whole message, that we have to go inward and rediscover our spiritual power as African people, because that's the essence of how we got this far.
Yes.
We gives a civilization, religion, science, medicine to the world because we are spiritually astute. And because of that spiritual consciousness, we've been able to transform human society in ways that no other group of people ever have or ever will.
And I think that goes back to this idea of us getting back to ourselves and turning inward, because it seems, and that quote, I'm not going to try to say the gentleman's name, but I think the way I interpreted that, this was a quote that he was making in general about the world in general. And I think as we kind of bought into the other people's ice being colder, we've negated ourselves, and even their own perspective or worldview no longer serves their best interest.
Yeah.
So it's like we're going down with a sinking ship rather than reaching into ourselves for our own life preservers, so to speak. You have thought about that?
Yeah. So we the ones that built the ship. So if the ship is going down, we're the only ones who can save us. And that's the sad part about it. We don't realize, African people don't realize we are the hope for this world. If human society is going to survive the 21st century, it's going to be because of us.
Okay, there were 3 points or comments that you made that I would like you to maybe expound on and explain for our viewers what these aspects are. You mentioned the Essenes. You also mentioned the Liberation Triangle, and you mentioned BCN teaches number 7. Could you restate those and maybe expound on how they fit in terms of this idea of us more effectively chasing the color purple?
BCN teaches number 7, the spirituality of African people encompasses the totality of life. And all Jeramogi Abebe was saying in that teaching is that spirituality is our superpower. Nobody's done it better. Nobody ever will do it better than us. That's who we are. And until we understand our superpower, we'll never be able to stop the kryptonite that's killing us all. The Essenes were a group of devout Jews who understood the messianic concept that God would send a savior if they created a righteous remnant and save Israel from destruction. And so they sought to be that righteous remnant that God could use to transform the lives of the covenant people. And Jesus was, as was John the Baptist, many theologians would concur, were a part of that movement. And we know that because of the history and the writings that the Essenes, the volume of writing they left. And when you read the books of the Essenes and you read the New Testament stories, Mark, Matthew, and Luke, and John, the quotes that they have for Jesus sound just like the Essenes. So there is a correlation between Jesus and the Essene movement. It was a movement of righteous Jews that were trying to save Israel from self-destruction and from the domination of the Romans, well, first the Greeks and then the Romans. And what was the third one?
The third one was the Liberation Triangle.
The Liberation Triangle, yeah, I did reference that. So the Liberation Triangle, Ujamaa Cody, we have to voluntarily invest in ourselves, in our community, in our institutions. You know, I could preach that for 100,000 years. We give all of our resources to everybody else. We're the last people that we help. And until we relearn, because we used to invest in our community, we used to run everything in our community, at least in Detroit. Until we learn how to do that again, there's no hope. Until we learn how to work for ourselves as hard as we work for our oppressor and the enemy system to keep it going. Once we learn how to do the same for ourselves and to use our talents and skills for ourselves while we're still trying to earn a living, until we make a priority building a sense of community, that's community outreach, Kasanya Watu, bringing our people together. Until we do those three things, there can be no freedom for Black people. The Liberation Tracker really is the basis of our struggle.
Okay, and you made your reference to the Essenes. I think you said, did you say they were righteous Jews? But you referenced them as Jews. Is this is distinct from the people that we typically think of as Jews today? Yes or no?
They were a mixture. I use Jews very loosely. They were a mixture of African people, not necessarily Jews, but those who had the same messianic expectation.
Okay.
Because you have to remember, in New Testament time, the Jews had been scattered all over. They had been exiled all over the Mediterranean, all over Northern Africa, and all over some parts of Rome and you know, lower Europe. So they were from many different cultural backgrounds. So there was no, you know, we always think they were the same people from Genesis to Revelation, but they weren't. So in New Testament time, it was a huge mixture of Jews, and to be a Jew was not a so much a religious designation as it was a cultural identity.
Okay.
So yeah, it was a mixture of African people.
Okay. And I wanted to also reference or just get clarity on BCN Teachers number 3, the reference to the spirituality of African people. When this was written, or when the African people means all people of African descent. I just wanted to clarify, because there are many of us that distinguish ourselves from other African people. So you have a thought about that, or?
Well, whether we identify with African people or not, it's still true. It's because it's in our DNA. We created religion. We created all of the spiritual disciplines. African people created all those things and gave those gifts to the whole world. And we took those gifts wherever we migrated when we came up out of Africa over hundreds and thousands of years. So that's our legacy, whether Europeans validate that or not. That's our legacy. That's who we are.
That's who we are. Well, I guess I was more concerned with how we interpret it. But thank you very much. Unfortunately, this brings us to a pause in the ongoing conversations we have here afterwards, as we bring to you the theology teachings of the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church through our broadcast weekly Sunday mornings at 11:30, where we have sermons presented for people to view and respond to and interpret. We thank you for this week's presentation, sermonic presentation, Chasing the Color Purple. Did you have any closing comments? Anything you'd like to leave the viewers with?
Go see the movie. Support Black actors and actresses.
Was that a paid advertisement by Taraji Henson? Okay, we thank you. For those of you that are viewing us, whenever and however you may choose to view us, we urge you to continue to tune in, join in the conversation. You can comment to the sermon as well as this broadcast. You can catch us every Sunday morning at 11:30 at Shrine Online on YouTube. We urge you to like the broadcast, share it broadly, continue to turn in. Consider joining us at one of our shrines around the country. And if you're unable to do that, continue to be a part, and you can become a member of Bila Kutu Bila Kuta, excuse me, wherever you may be in the world. Thank you very much, Cardinal Mbayu, and we will see all of you soon. Peace.
Peace out.